Under the icy rain, a little girl makes an unlikely request before an imposing mansion, and from that moment on, forgotten secrets begin to awaken. On a cold, rainy winter night, on the quiet, tree-lined streets of Pine Ridge, Emily walked with slow steps, protecting little Lily under her worn coat as the child shivered from the cold. The lights of the mountain town, known for illuminating mansions and luxury hotels, seemed distant from the reality of the two. The cutting wind brought the smell of wet earth, and puddles reflected the pale glow of street lamps. At that moment, the only thing that mattered was finding shelter for the night and, if possible, a little food for her daughter. Emily adjusted the improvised scarf around Lily's neck and smiled at the girl, trying to convey a confidence she didn't feel. At 6 years old, Lily was a quiet and observant child, with large eyes that seemed to see beyond what was in front of her. On her delicate wrist, a bracelet of colorful beads dangled, the only memento of a past that Emily preferred not to revisit. "Mommy, I'm cold," Lily murmured, squeezing her mother's hand with her small frozen fingers. "I know, my love. We'll find a warm place soon," Emily replied, stroking her daughter's damp hair. Ahead stood the imposing Harrington estate, with high walls, an ornate iron gate, and vast gardens, now soaked by the rain. Emily hesitated for a few seconds before approaching. There were rumors in town about the owner of that property, a lonely and bitter man who was rarely seen outside his domain. They said that sadness had consumed him after a family tragedy. Emily wasn't sure what truth there was in these stories, but at that moment, faced with the desperation of the cold night, any chance was better than none. Inside the mansion, Richard Harrington observed the security monitors in his private room, as he did in the rare moments when he wasn't locked in his office or on business trips. At 45, the successful real estate businessman carried on his face the marks of a life that had lost its shine long ago. Since the loss of his daughter Anna 7 years earlier, his existence had transformed into a silent and calculated routine, distancing him from almost everyone. The mansion, once full of movement, had become a space marked by the echo of solitary footsteps and the absence of laughter. His tired eyes passed distractedly over the camera images when something caught his attention. On the screen showing the main gate, a woman and a child approached hesitantly. The rain fell mercilessly upon them, and even through the black and white image, Richard could perceive the helplessness evident in their gestures. He was about to ignore the scene when a detail made him freeze. On the girl's wrist, a bracelet of colorful beads swung, identical to the one he had once given to Anna. "It's not possible," he murmured to himself, moving closer to the screen. The resemblance was disturbing, as if the past was knocking at his door on that stormy night. For a moment, Richard was paralyzed, divided between uncomfortable curiosity and the desire to remain isolated in his carefully constructed world. Finally, something inside him yielded. He picked up the intercom and, with a voice rough from disuse, asked, "Who's there?" Emily startled at hearing the metallic voice coming from the intercom. She held Lily close before answering, her voice trembling from cold and nervousness. "I'm sorry to bother you at this hour, sir. My name is Emily Sanders, and this is my daughter Lily. We're in need of shelter, just for tonight. The rain caught us unprepared and—" Richard interrupted her, his voice still distant but with a tone Emily couldn't decipher. "What do you know how to do?" The question caught her by surprise. I know how to clean, cook, take care of gardens. I can work in exchange for shelter." "Sir?" On the other side, Richard hesitated. He wasn't sure why he was considering this. For years he hadn't allowed strangers in his house besides the employees who came during the day and left before nightfall. Something about that woman, and, especially, that child with the bracelet, stirred memories he had tried to bury. "Wait. There," he finally said, turning off the intercom. Minutes later, which seemed like an eternity to Emily, the imposing gate began to open slowly. Lily looked at her mother with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. "It's all right, honey," Emily whispered, though she wasn't sure of that. "Let's go in." The path to the main entrance was long and adorned with well-tended trees and shrubs, now bent by the force of the rain. The mansion seemed even larger up close, with its tall windows and imposing architecture. Some lights were on, casting elongated shadows over the soaked lawn. When they reached the front door, it opened before they could knock. Richard Harrington stood in the doorway, his silhouette cut against the yellowish light of the hall. He was a tall man with an elegant bearing, greying hair at the temples, and deep eyes that seemed to evaluate every detail of the two drenched figures before him. "Come in," he said, simply stepping aside. The contrast between the cutting cold outside and the cozy warmth inside the mansion made Lily let out a small sigh of relief. Emily entered, hesitantly, holding her daughter by the hand, feeling out of place with her wet clothes on the impeccable marble floor. "Thank you, sir. I promise we won't be a bother," Emily said, trying to control the tremor in her voice. Richard didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the bracelet on Lily's wrist. The girl noticed his gaze and instinctively hid her hand behind her back, as if she had done something wrong. "Martha," Richard called, finally looking away. A middle-aged woman with a kind appearance and an impeccable apron appeared from a side corridor. "Yes, sir?" "Take them to the guest room in the east wing and provide dry clothes and something to eat," he instructed, already turning to leave. "Tomorrow we'll talk about work," he added, addressing Emily without really looking at her. Before he could fully withdraw, Lily took a step forward, her childish voice echoing in the spacious hall. "Your house smells like purple flowers, mister." Richard stopped abruptly as if he had been struck. He turned slowly, his face pale. "What did you say?" Emily gently pulled Lily back, feeling the sudden tension in the air. "I'm sorry, sir. Lily has a very vivid imagination." But Richard wasn't. Listening. His eyes were fixed on the girl as if trying to decipher an impossible puzzle. Lavender. The scent of lavender. That's how Anna used to describe the cologne he wore. "Smells like purple flowers," she would say. No one else used that expression. "Follow Martha," he finally said, his voice low and controlled. "Rest. Tomorrow we'll decide what to do." As Emily and Lily followed the housekeeper through the corridors of the mansion, Richard remained motionless, in the hall, feeling that something had just changed in his carefully isolated life. That rainy night had brought more than two strangers to his house. It had also brought the ghost of a past that refused to stay buried. In the east wing, Martha showed Emily and Lily a spacious and cozy room, with a large canopy bed and windows that overlooked the back garden. "The bathroom is there," the woman indicated, pointing to a side door. "I'll bring some dry clothes and some hot soup. You must be freezing." When Martha left, Emily sat on the edge of the bed and hugged Lily, allowing herself, for the first time that night, to feel the exhaustion consuming her. "Mommy," Lily whispered, her large eyes fixed on her mother's face. "Why did the man get sad when I talked about the purple flower?" Emily shook her head, stroking her daughter's damp hair. "I don't know, my love. Sometimes people carry sorrows we know nothing about." Lily seemed to consider that for a moment, and then said, with the disconcerting simplicity of children, "He has the same sad eyes that you have sometimes when you think I'm not looking." Emily swallowed hard, surprised by her daughter's perception. Before she could respond, Martha returned, with dry clothes and a tray with steaming soup and fresh bread. The delicious aroma filled the room, reminding Emily of how long it had been since her last decent meal. Meanwhile, in the dark library at the other end of the mansion, Richard Harrington poured himself a generous measure of whiskey, trying to calm the thoughts spinning in his mind. The beaded bracelet, the smell of purple flowers. Coincidences, certainly. They had to be. Any other possibility was too painful to consider. Still, something about the presence of those two strangers had broken the anesthetized routine he had lived in for years. It was as if an unexpected wind had entered a house closed for too long, stirring up dust and memories. Richard knew he should send them away in the morning. It was the sensible thing to do. But as he watched the rain beat against the windows of the mansion, a part of him, a part he thought had been dormant for a long time, felt strangely reluctant to return to the solitude that had become both his only refuge and his prison. The next morning, the rain had given way to a dense fog that covered the gardens of the Harrington estate like a ghostly cloak. Emily awoke early, still disoriented by the contrast between the luxury surrounding her and the precariousness in which she had lived in recent months. Beside her, Lily slept peacefully, the bracelet of colourful beads shining under the faint light that entered through the curtain slits. Careful not to wake her daughter, Emily got up and approached the window. The garden, even covered by mist, revealed itself to be vast and meticulously cared for, with geometric flower beds and a central fountain that was now silent. Beyond the high wall one could glimpse the outline of the mountains surrounding Pine Ridge, majestic in their silent grandeur. "Do you like what you see?" The voice behind her made Emily turn abruptly. Richard Harrington stood at the door of the room, which she was sure she had closed the night before. He wore an impeccably cut suit that accentuated his elegant figure, but also seemed like armor, keeping the world at a distance. "It's a beautiful garden," Emily replied, recovering from the surprise. "It looks like it came out of a dream." Richard entered the room, his steps almost inaudible on the Persian rug. His eyes, Emily noticed, deliberately avoided the bed where Lily was still sleeping. "My wife designed it," he said, his voice controlled, as if each word were carefully chosen. "Rebecca had a gift for creating beauty." The use of the past tense didn't go unnoticed by Emily. "She is no longer—" "No," Richard cut her off, not giving her space to complete the sentence. "There is work to be done if you're still interested in staying." Emily nodded quickly. "Of course, Mr. Harrington, I can start immediately." "Martha will show you what needs to be done," he said, heading for the door. Before leaving, however, he stopped and added, without turning around, "Anna's room, my daughter's, is at the end of the corridor to the right. It's locked. I'd like it to remain that way." After Richard's departure, Emily stood there absorbing what she had just heard. So the rumor was true. He really had lost a daughter. This explained the atmosphere of mourning that seemed to permeate every corner of the mansion. Lily woke up shortly after, with that energy of children that seems to renew itself completely during sleep. As she helped her daughter dress in the clothes Martha had provided, simple but of much higher quality than they had, Emily explained that they would stay there for now, and that she would work for the owner of the house. "And can I explore the garden, Mommy?" asked Lily, her eyes shining with anticipation. "Only if you stay where I can see you and after I finish the main chores," Emily replied, combing the girl's dark hair. "And remember, we shouldn't disturb Mr. Harrington. He's a busy man." Busy with his ghosts, Emily thought, but kept the thought to herself. In the hours that followed, Martha showed Emily the tasks she should perform: cleaning the main rooms, helping in the kitchen, taking care of the laundry. The mansion, despite being impeccably maintained, had an air of subtle abandonment in certain corners, as if some spaces had been deliberately forgotten. "Mr. Harrington rarely uses the music room or the large living room," Martha explained as she guided Emily down the main corridor. "But he likes everything to always be clean and in order, even the places he doesn't enter." Emily absorbed every piece of information, mentally mapping the house. "How long have you been working here?" Martha hesitated for a moment. 23 years. I came when Mr. Richard married Mrs. Rebecca. They were different times, and the house had life then." "And what happened to his daughter?" Emily couldn't contain the question, though she knew she was treading on delicate ground. Martha's face hardened momentarily. "Anna was an angel. She was only 5 years old when she left us. An accident. Mr. Richard was never the same after that." The housekeeper paused and then added, as if speaking to herself, "And then when Mrs. Rebecca departed too, it was as if the last ray of light had gone out in this house." Emily wanted to ask more, but Martha's definitive tone made it clear that the subject was closed. She respected the woman's silence and focused on learning her new responsibilities. Meanwhile, Lily had been left in the care of Helen, the middle-aged cook who prepared the meals, and seemed delighted with the presence of the girl in the house. With permission to explore the inner garden, Lily went from flower bed to flower bed, fascinated by the flowers that bloomed despite the cold of the mountains. It was during one of these explorations that Lily found the first strange object, an old necklace with a butterfly-shaped pendant, partially buried near a hydrangea bush. Intrigued, the girl carefully dug it up and examined it in the daylight. The pendant, though dirty with soil, still retained a peculiar shine, as if it had been placed there recently. That same afternoon, while cleaning the library, Emily found a sealed envelope on one of the side tables. There was no sender, only the name Richard written in a delicate handwriting. She hesitated, envelope in hand, feeling that there was something important there, something that might explain part of the mystery surrounding that house and its owner. Before she could decide what to do, Richard's voice sounded behind her, making her start for the second time that day. "Found something interesting?" Emily turned quickly, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, sir, I was just cleaning and saw this envelope." Richard approached and took the envelope from her hands, examining it with an indecipherable expression. "Where did you find it?" "Exactly where it was, sir. On this table." Richard frowned, visibly disturbed. "Nobody enters this library except me and now you. Martha only cleans when I'm present." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. "Perhaps you left it there and forgot." "I never forget anything, Emily," he said, his tone cutting. He observed the envelope for another moment before putting it in the inner pocket of his jacket. "Continue your work." The uneasiness of that brief encounter stayed with Emily for the rest of the day. There was something strange happening in that house, something she couldn't fully understand. At night, as she prepared Lily for bed, the girl showed her the necklace she had found. "Look, Mommy, how pretty." It was hidden in the garden, like her treasure. Emily examined the object, feeling an inexplicable discomfort. "Lily, you shouldn't take things that don't belong to you. Tomorrow we'll return this to Mr. Harrington." Lily made a small pout of disappointment, but agreed. Before falling asleep, however, she said something that made Emily's heart race. "Mommy, today I played with a girl in the garden." Emily, who was adjusting the covers, stopped abruptly. "A girl? What girl, Lily?" "She didn't tell me her name," Lily replied, already with heavy eyes from sleep. "But she knew everything about the flowers. She said the blue ones are hydrangeas and that they change color depending on the soil. She was sad because she couldn't come into the house." A chill ran through Emily. Since they had arrived, she hadn't seen any children in the vicinity, and Martha had explicitly said they didn't receive visitors. "Maybe it was a dream, sweetheart," she suggested, trying to keep her voice calm. Lily shook her head, stubborn even on the threshold of sleep. It wasn't a dream. She wore a blue dress with butterflies just like the pendant on the necklace, and she knew my name without me telling her. Emily waited until Lily was sound asleep before leaving the room, taking the necklace with her. Her steps led her almost unconsciously to the library, where Richard spent most of his nights, according to Martha. She found him sitting in a leather armchair, a book open on his lap, but his eyes fixed on the lit fireplace. Without his suit, wearing only a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves, he seemed less intimidating, more human. "Mr. Harrington," she called softly, "I'm sorry to disturb you so late." Richard raised his eyes, and Emily saw that he was holding in one hand the envelope she had found earlier, now open. "What is it?" he asked, quickly composing himself. Emily extended the necklace. "Lily found this in the garden today. I thought I should return it to you." Richard set aside the envelope and took the necklace, his fingers momentarily touching Emily's. A brief contact, but one that sent a strange current of electricity up her arm. "This necklace," he murmured, examining the butterfly pendant. "It was Anna's. Rebecca gave it to her on her last birthday before the accident. It was kept in a box in my safe." Emily felt her mouth go dry. "Impossible. Lily found it buried in the garden near the hydrangeas." "The hydrangeas were Anna's favorites," said Richard, his voice now almost a whisper. He raised his eyes to Emily, and there was an intensity in them that made her instinctively step back. "Did your daughter say anything else about how she found it, or—" Emily hesitated. Telling about the supposed girl in the garden seemed absurd, but something in Richard's gaze compelled her to speak. "She said she played with a girl in the garden today, a girl who wouldn't say her name, but who knew everything about flowers, who wore a blue dress with butterflies." Richard stood up so abruptly that the book in his lap fell to the floor with a dull thud. Anna had a dress like that. It was her favorite. A heavy silence settled between them, laden with unasked questions and disturbing possibilities. Richard seemed to be fighting against some powerful emotion, his hands gripping the necklace so tightly that his knuckles whitened. "Go to bed, Emily," he finally said, turning his back on her. Tomorrow we'll talk more." Emily wanted to insist, wanted to understand what was happening, but respected Richard's moment. She left the library silently, leaving him alone with his thoughts and with the necklace that connected past and present in ways that neither of them could fully comprehend. Upon returning to the room, she found Lily sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the mysteries beginning to unfold around her. Emily lay down beside her daughter, but sleep was slow to come. Her mind buzzed with unanswered questions. Who was Richard Harrington really? What had happened to his wife and daughter? And why did Lily, who had never set foot in that house before, seem connected to secrets buried for so long? The mansion, imposing and silent, kept its answers under layers of pain and memories. And now, with the arrival of Emily and Lily, these secrets were slowly beginning to emerge from the shadows, as if they had waited years for this moment. On the other side of the corridor in the dark library, Richard watched the flames dance in the fireplace, the butterfly necklace in one hand, and in the other, the anonymous letter Emily had found. A letter that contained only one sentence, written in the same delicate handwriting he knew so well. "She has returned, as promised." A week passed since Emily and Lily's arrival at the Harrington estate. A routine gradually established itself, with Emily dedicated to household chores, while Lily explored the permitted areas of the property, always under the watchful eye of Helen or Martha. Richard, meanwhile, kept his distance most of the time, locked in his office or absent on business commitments. However, Emily noticed how his eyes followed Lily when he thought no one was watching, a gaze that mixed fascination, fear, and a deep melancholy. Inexplicable events continued to occur. One morning, Martha found the music room window completely open, despite having been locked the night before. On another occasion, all the books on a specific library shelf appeared reorganized in an order that no one recognized. Small details that isolated could be dismissed as coincidences, but together formed a disturbing pattern. That Tuesday, rain returned to Pine Ridge, forcing Lily to remain inside the mansion. The girl, restless after days of freedom in the garden, wandered the corridors, observing the old paintings and sculptures that decorated the niches. Emily accompanied her while performing her tasks, trying to keep her entertained. "Mommy, why is that door always closed?" asked Lily, pointing to the end of the corridor where the room Richard had mentioned on the first day was located, Anna's room. "Because there are things people prefer to keep only for themselves," Emily replied gently, diverting her daughter's attention. "Come, let's see if Helen needs help in the kitchen." Lily followed her mother, but not without casting a final glance at the closed door. Emily noticed that in recent days, her daughter seemed increasingly intrigued by that forbidden room, as if something there were calling to her. In the kitchen, they found Helen preparing lunch, the aroma of fresh spices filling the environment. The cook, a robust woman with dark skin and an easy smile, was the only truly cheerful presence in that somber house. "Ah, good that you came," she exclaimed, stroking Lily's hair. "I'm making a cornbread that my grandmother taught me. Want to help mix, little one?" Lily nodded enthusiastically, climbing onto a stool to reach the counter. While the girl was distracted with the task, Emily took the opportunity to ask Helen about what intrigued her so much. "Helen, you've worked here for a long time, haven't you?" "Almost as long as Martha," replied the cook without diverting her attention from the batter she was preparing. "I've seen this house in its best and worst moments." Emily lowered her voice, ensuring that Lily was entertained enough not to pay attention. What really happened to Mr. Harrington's daughter and to his wife? Helen stopped what she was doing, looking at Emily with a grave expression. "Why do you want to know that, girl?" Because strange things have been happening since we arrived," confessed Emily. "The necklace Lily found, the windows that open by themselves, and—" She hesitated before continuing. "Lily says she plays with a girl in the garden, a girl that no one else sees." Helen's expression transformed into a mixture of fear and understanding. "Holy Mother of God," she murmured, quickly making the sign of the cross. "I knew it. I always knew Anna hadn't completely departed." "What do you mean by that?" Helen approached, speaking almost in whispers. "Anna had a gift, Emily. She saw things that others didn't see, knew things she shouldn't know. Mrs. Rebecca said it was intuition, but Mr. Richard never accepted that part of his daughter well. After the accident—" "What accident?" insisted Emily. "Anna fell in the lake during a boat ride. Mr. Richard couldn't save her in time." Helen wiped away a furtive tear. 2 years later, Mrs. Rebecca fell ill. It was quick, as if life had simply drained from her. Before departing, however, she said something that Mr. Richard never forgot, that Anna had promised to return. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. "And you think—" "I don't know what I think," interrupted Helen, resuming her work with renewed vigor, as if wanting to drive away dangerous thoughts. "I just know that since you and the girl arrived, this house seems to breathe again. And that can be good or bad depending on how Mr. Richard handles it." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the corridor. Richard appeared at the kitchen door, his countenance serious as always, but with something different in his gaze when he laid eyes on Lily, who was still focused on her task of mixing the cornbread batter. "Emily, I need to speak with you," he said, his tone leaving no room for refusal. "Tighty, dear. In my office now." Emily exchanged a quick glance with Helen before following Richard. The cook nodded silently, indicating she would take care of Lily. The path to the office was traversed in tense silence, each step echoing on the polished wooden floor. Richard's office was a spacious room, with walls lined with books and a large mahogany desk at the center. Through the tall windows, one could see the rain punishing the gardens, transforming the landscape into a grey blur. "Close the door," Richard ordered, heading to a side table where a bottle of cognac and some glasses awaited. He served himself a generous portion, and after a moment of hesitation, served another glass for Emily. "I found this today," he said, handing her a folded piece of paper. "On my work desk under documents that haven't been moved in days." Emily carefully unfolded the paper. It was a child's drawing made with colored pencils, a large house similar to the mansion with 3 figures holding hands in front, a man, a woman, and a girl. In the lower corner, in clumsy handwriting, it read, "For Daddy with love, Anna." "This drawing was kept in a box in my safe," continued Richard, his voice controlled but with an almost imperceptible tremor. "Along with the necklace your daughter found and other mementos of Anna. The box is still there, locked, but the things inside it seem to escape." Emily returned the drawing, suddenly feeling dizzy. "I don't know what to say, Mr. Harrington. I have no explanation for this." Richard took a long sip of his drink before continuing. "Your daughter, Lily, since when has she had the bracelet?" The question caught Emily off guard. "The beaded bracelet. Since always, I think. It was a gift she received when she was very small." "From whom?" Emily looked away, suddenly uncomfortable. "I don't remember exactly. It was a long time ago." Richard approached, his intense eyes fixed on hers. "Don't lie to me, Emily. Not here, not now." Something in his voice made Emily step back. There was pain there, and anger, but also a silent plea that she couldn't ignore. "The bracelet was with Lily when I found her," she finally confessed. "She was only a few months old. She had been abandoned at the door of a shelter in New York, with only that bracelet and a note asking someone to take care of her. I worked there at the time, and I became attached. When I left, I took her with me. I legalized the adoption a few years later." Richard remained motionless, processing the information. Then, abruptly, he went to a bookshelf and removed a thick book. From inside it, he extracted a photograph that he extended to Emily. "This is Anna's bracelet," he said, his voice almost inaudible. "Made by Rebecca with colorful beads that we brought from a trip to Peru. It was unique." Emily observed the photograph with a racing heart. In it, a girl of approximately 5 years smiled at the camera, dark hair framing an angelic face. On her wrist, clearly visible, was a bracelet identical to Lily's, the same colors, the same pattern, even the small star-shaped charm. "This is impossible," Emily murmured, feeling disoriented. "It must be a coincidence. It has to be." Richard carefully put away the photograph like someone handling a fragile treasure. "I no longer believe in coincidences, Emily, not after everything that has been happening in this house since your arrival." That moment, a muffled boom sounded above them, coming from the upper floor. Richard and Emily exchanged alarmed looks before running to check what had happened. Following the sound, they reached the corridor of the second floor, where a narrow staircase led to the attic. The attic door, which according to Martha was always locked, was wide open. "Lily," Emily whispered, feeling the blood freeze in her veins. They quickly climbed the stairs, Richard in the lead. The attic was a spacious and dusty place, full of furniture covered with white sheets and boxes neatly stacked. In the center, illuminated by a ray of light entering through the skylight, was Lily, kneeling in front of an open wooden box. "Lily!" exclaimed Emily, running to her daughter. "What are you doing here? How did you get in?" The girl raised her eyes, a mixture of innocence and knowledge in her gaze that made Emily shudder. "The girl from the garden showed me, Mommy. She said, I needed to see this." Richard approached, slowly, his gaze fixed on the open box. Emily saw that it contained old photographs, yellowed newspaper clippings, and a small diary with a red cover. "It's Rebecca's diary," Richard murmured, his voice choked. "I never knew she kept it here." Lily picked up one of the photographs and extended it to Richard with naturalness, as if returning something that belonged to him. "She wants you to see this. She said you forgot, but you shouldn't have." The photograph showed a young couple, Richard, at least 15 years younger, and a woman of serene beauty and gentle eyes. Between them, holding hands with both, was Anna. They were in front of a simple house very different from the luxurious mansion, all smiling. Richard took the photograph with trembling hands. "Our first house," he whispered, more to himself than to the others. "Before the money, before everything changed." Emily, still kneeling beside Lily, didn't know what to say. There was something deeply intimate about that moment, as if she were witnessing the crumbling of a wall, carefully constructed over years. Lily, however, seemed perfectly at ease. She took the diary and opened it to a specific page, as if she knew exactly what she was looking for. "Please read," she asked, extending it to Richard. With reluctance, Richard took the diary and looked at the indicated page. Emily observed, as his face lost color, his eyes quickly scanning the lines written in the delicate handwriting that she recognized as the same as the anonymous letter. "What does it say?" she finally asked, unable to contain her curiosity. Richard closed the diary, his hands visibly trembling now. "Private things. Rebecca's thoughts that I never knew." But there was something more. Emily could feel it, something that had deeply shaken him. Lily stood up and, to the surprise of both adults, took Richard's hand with naturalness. "Don't be sad. She's not angry with you. She just wants you to remember." Richard looked at the girl as if seeing her for the first time, not as an intruder, not as a stranger, but as someone familiar returning after a long absence. "Who is she, Lily?" he asked with gentleness. Lily smiled, that innocent yet ancient smile that sometimes disconcerted even Emily. "The girl from the garden, Anna. She says she misses you, but that she's happy to have found her way back." A dense silence filled the attic, broken only by the sound of rain on the roof and Richard's irregular breathing. Emily saw tears form in his eyes, the first she had witnessed since they had arrived at the mansion. "Lily, why don't you go see if Helen has finished?" "The cornbread?" suggested Emily, feeling that Richard needed space. The girl nodded, releasing Richard's hand. Before descending the stairs, however, she turned one last time. "She's here, you know, not just in the garden, everywhere, waiting for you to understand." When they were alone, Emily approached Richard, who remained motionless, the diary still in his hands. "Mr. Harrington?" "Richard," she said softly. "I don't know what's happening here, but Lily has never been one to make up stories. If she says she sees, if she feels something—" "Do you believe in this?" he interrupted, his voice harsh. in spirits, in souls that return, in promises made beyond death. Emily hesitated. I don't know what I believe, but I know there are more things in heaven and earth than our vain philosophy can explain. Richard looked at her, really looked for the first time since they had met. Why did you and Lily end up here, Emily? Of all places, of all houses in Pine Ridge, why my door? It was a question she herself had asked countless times over that week. I don't know, she answered honestly. Maybe chance, maybe. There is no chance, Richard cut in, carefully putting the diary back in the box and closing it. Rebecca believed that each encounter, each event, had a greater purpose. I never shared that belief. Until now. They left the attic in silence, each immersed in their own thoughts. On the way back, they passed through the corridor where Anna's locked room was located. To Emily's surprise, Richard stopped in front of the door. Tomorrow, he said, more to himself than to her. Tomorrow. Perhaps it's time to open this door again. Emily nodded, feeling that something fundamental had changed between them. The wall that Richard maintained around himself, that invisible but palpable barrier, was beginning to show cracks. As they descended the stairs, the aroma of freshly baked cornbread reached them, along with the distant sound of Lily's laughter. In the kitchen, sounds and smells of life that seemed to slowly awaken the mansion from its long sleep. That night, lying beside the peacefully sleeping Lily, Emily mentally revisited the day's events. The diary found the photograph of the Sioux, happy family before the tragedy, Lily's enigmatic words. There were pieces of a puzzle moving around her, slowly forming an image that she still couldn't completely discern. On the other side of the corridor, Richard remained awake in his library, Rebecca's diary open to the same page that Lily had indicated. His eyes repeatedly scanned the lines written years ago, seeking to understand what his wife had tried to tell him before departing. Anna came to me in a dream again. She said she found the way, but that she will need help to return. She spoke of a woman and a child who will come on a rainy night. Richard won't believe it, I know. But when the time comes, I hope he can open his heart to the mystery that unites us all, beyond time, beyond understanding. Anna promised to return, and I believe her. The next morning dawned crystal clear, as if the previous night's storm had washed away not only the landscape, but also the invisible barriers that separated the inhabitants of the Harrington estate. Emily woke with the first rays of sun entering through the window, finding the bed empty beside her. For a moment she felt her heart accelerate until she heard Lily's laughter coming from the garden. She approached the window and saw something she would never have expected. Richard was walking slowly through the garden with Lily by his side. The girl was talking animatedly, pointing to the flowers and trees, while he listened with genuine attention, occasionally kneeling to better observe what she was showing him. There was a lightness in his movements that Emily had never witnessed before. She dressed quickly and went downstairs, meeting Martha in the main corridor. "Good morning, Emily," greeted the housekeeper, a subtle smile on her lips. "Breakfast is served on the veranda. Mr. Richard asked that you join them when you woke up." "Thank you, Martha," Emily replied, still surprised by the change. "Richard, he seems different today." Martha nodded, her eyes revealing contained emotion. "It's been years since I've seen him walk in that garden, years since I've heard him say good morning before I greeted him. Whatever is happening, girl, is bringing life back to this house." On the veranda, a table was set with fresh fruits, breads, cakes, and juices, a more elaborate breakfast than usual. Emily observed Richard and Lily for a few more moments before joining them. The natural intimacy between the two disconcerted her. It was as if they had known each other for years, not days. "Mommy!" exclaimed Lily upon seeing her. "Richard is showing me all the plants in the garden. He knows the name of each one in English and in Latin too." Richard smiled, a genuine smile that completely transformed his austere face. "Lily has a natural talent for botany. She identified 3 species that even the gardener didn't know by name." Emily sat at the table, trying to process the transformation. "I see you two got an early start today." "Lily knocked on my door at 6 in the morning," explained Richard, serving her a cup of coffee. Said she wanted to show me something in the garden before the sun got too strong. Lily, who was now playing with a beetle that had landed on the veranda railing, intervened. It was important. The blue flowers only show their true blue very early, before the sun makes them more purple. Hydrangeas, explained Richard, noticing Emily's confused expression. They change shade according to the daylight and the acidity of the soil, exactly as Anna used to say, Lily completed distractedly, turning her attention back to the insect. A momentary silence fell over the table. Emily expected to see Richard's countenance harden at the mention of Anna, as had happened so many times before. Instead, he just observed Lily with a thoughtful expression before turning to Emily. "After breakfast, I'd like to show you something," he said, his voice calm but decisive. "There's much we need to talk about." Breakfast proceeded in a surprisingly pleasant atmosphere. Lily entertained the adults with observations about the birds visiting the garden, while Richard occasionally added some information about the local species. Emily observed the interaction, divided between the relief of seeing her daughter so at ease and a growing uneasiness about what Richard wanted to show her. When they finished, Martha came to take Lily to help her feed the fish in the small ornamental pond, leaving Emily and Richard alone. "Come with me," he said, standing up. Emily followed him through the corridors of the mansion, noticing how the morning light transformed the environment, previously somber and oppressive, into something almost welcoming. They climbed the main staircase and walked down the second-floor corridor until they stopped in front of the door that Emily knew to be Anna's room. Richard took a key from his pocket and, after a moment of hesitation, unlocked the door. "I haven't entered here for more than 5 years," he confessed, his voice slightly trembling. "After Rebecca departed, I had this room locked and forbade it to be opened, even for cleaning." He pushed the door slowly, revealing an environment preserved in time like a capsule. It was a child's room decorated in soft shades of blue and green, with a small bed covered with an embroidered quilt, shelves full of books and toys, and a desk where notebooks and colored pencils remained organized, as if waiting for the return of their owner. Emily entered cautiously, feeling like an intruder in a sanctuary. The smell of lavender hung in the air, surprisingly fresh for an environment closed for so long. The room was kept exactly as she left it on the morning of the last day, said Richard, remaining at the door, as if he couldn't take the final step to enter. Emily slowly traversed the room, absorbing the details. On the desk, she saw drawings similar to the one they had found in the attic, family scenes, landscapes, childish portraits of people. One in particular caught her attention. It showed a dark-haired woman holding the hand of a small girl, both in front of a building that looked like a shelter. "Richard," Emily called, her voice little more than a whisper. "When was this drawing made?" He finally entered the room, approaching to see the drawing she indicated. "A week before the accident, Anna was having strange dreams at that time. She said she saw people and places she had never visited. This was one of them, Rebecca. Believed it was some kind of gift. I thought it was just a child's imagination." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. The building in the drawing was unmistakable, the St. Clair shelter where she had worked and where she had found Lily as a baby. "Richard, this place exists. It's the shelter where I found Lily." Richard stared at her, his expression indecipherable. "That's impossible. Anna was never there, never even visited New York." "Yet here it is," insisted Emily, pointing to details in the drawing that only someone who knew the place could include: the colorful mural at the entrance, the large yellow ipe tree in the courtyard, even the small bell at the main door. Richard took the drawing with trembling hands. "Rebecca used to say that Anna could see beyond the present, that she had visions, dreams that sometimes came true. I never really believed until the day before the accident. Anna woke up crying, saying she had dreamed she was in the water, that she couldn't breathe." Richard swallowed hard, the old pain reflected in every line of his face. "I said it was just a nightmare, that it didn't mean anything. The next day, we went for a boat ride on the lake as planned. The boat capsized and—" Emily approached, instinctively placing her hand on his arm. "You don't need to continue. "No, I do," insisted Richard, his voice firm despite the emotion. "For years I blamed myself for not listening, for not believing. Rebecca never openly accused me, but I know she thought the same, that we could have avoided everything if I had taken Anna's dream seriously." Emily looked around the room again, trying to organize her thoughts. And after, what happened to Rebecca? She never got over the loss. Neither of us did, actually, but we dealt with it in different ways. I closed myself off, buried myself in work. Rebecca, she started having her own dreams. She said Anna talked to her, that she had found a way to come back. Richard paused, as if weighing his next words. In the last months before she fell, still Rebecca wrote a lot in that diary we found in the attic. She talked about signs, promises, a greater plan that we didn't understand. I thought it was grief talking, a way to keep Anna alive somehow. And now, what do you think now? Richard turned to her, his eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and hope. I don't know. But since you and Lily arrived, I can't ignore the signs. The identical bracelet, Lily's knowledge about things she shouldn't know, even the fact that you two ended up at my door on a rainy night, exactly as Rebecca described in her diary. Emily sat on the edge of Anna's bed, feeling the weight of the implications of what they were discussing. Are you suggesting that that she could be— I don't know what I'm suggesting, interrupted Richard, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. Reincarnation, some kind of spiritual connection, extreme coincidences? It all sounds absurd when said out loud. Yet here we are, completed Emily, her gaze traversing the child's room that seemed to vibrate with an invisible presence. Richard sat beside her, the sudden proximity surprising her. I need to ask you something, Emily. Something that might seem strange, but that I can't get out of my head since yesterday. What is it? When exactly was Lily left at the shelter? What's the date? Emily closed her eyes, searching her memory. October 17th. I remember because it was the shelter director's birthday, almost 6 years ago. Richard remained motionless, as if he had been hit by an electric shock. Anna left us on October 15th, 7 years ago. Rebecca passed away in mid-May the following year. The silence that followed was dense, laden with possibilities that neither dared to fully name. Sunlight entered through the window, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air, like fragments of time suspended between past and present. There's one more thing I need to show you, Richard finally said, getting up. He went to a small dresser and opened the top drawer, from which he removed an intricately carved wooden box. This was with Anna when we found her. I could never open it, as the key was lost. Emily observed the small box, noticing the delicate details carved in the wood, butterflies and flowers that formed a unique pattern around the lock. The small golden key, she murmured, suddenly remembering. Lily found a key like that a few days ago, between the pages of a children's book in the library. Richard raised his eyes, surprised. Where is that key now? Lily kept it. She said it was special, that she needed to keep it until she found where to use it. As if summoned by the conversation, they heard light footsteps in the corridor, and soon after, Lily appeared at the door, her eyes wide with fascination at seeing the room open for the first time. It's exactly like in my dreams, she whispered, entering slowly. Emily and Richard observed in silence as Lily traversed the room, touching objects with a disconcerting familiarity. The books on the shelf, the organized toys, the embroidered quilt on the bed. It wasn't the natural curiosity of a child exploring a new environment, but the recognition of one returning to a known place. Lily, Richard called softly, you talked about a golden key you found. Can you show us? The girl nodded, removing from the pocket of her dress a small golden key, exactly the size of the lock on the box Richard was holding. It's for this, she said simply, pointing to the box. She told me you kept important things in there. Richard extended the box, his hands visibly trembling. Lily took it with naturalness and inserted the key into the lock. With a soft click, the lid opened, revealing the interior lined with blue velvet. Inside were some objects apparently without great value, A small, pearly shell, a transparent crystal, a white feather, a dried leaf preserved between layers of tissue paper, and a carefully folded piece of paper. These are her treasures, explained Lily as if it were obvious. Things she found and thought were special. Richard took the folded paper and opened it with infinite care. It was another drawing, but different from the previous ones. It showed 3 people holding hands, a man, a woman, and a girl, in front of what appeared to be the Harrington estate. Below, in childish handwriting, it read, "My new family someday." Emily approached to see better and felt her blood freeze in her veins. The drawing clearly showed Richard, but the woman at his side was not Rebecca. It was someone who looked disturbingly like herself. "This doesn't make sense," she murmured, taking a step back. "How could Anna have drawn me? How could she have known?" Lily, who was observing the other treasures in the box, raised her eyes with that ancient expression she sometimes assumed. "Some people can see the future in dreams, Mommy. Others can remember past lives, and some can make promises that cross time." The simplicity with which the girl spoke of such profound things left the adults momentarily speechless. Richard, carefully, put the drawing back in the box, his thoughts a whirlwind reflected on his face. "What else do you know, Lily?" he finally asked, kneeling to be at the girl's height. "What else? Did she tell you?" Lily smiled, that innocent smile that hid wisdom beyond her years, many things, about what it was like to live here, about how much she loved you and her mother, about the places she wanted to visit when she grew up. About the accident, too. The girl paused, observing Richard's expression. "She said it wasn't your fault, that some things needed to happen so that others could exist in the future." Richard lowered his head, a solitary tear running down his face. Emily felt her own heart tighten at the scene, the strong, controlled man finally allowing himself to feel the grief he had suppressed for so long. Lily approached and, with a naturalness that surprised both adults, hugged Richard. "It's all right," she whispered. "She understands, and she's happy that we're all together now." Emily observed the scene, divided between astonishment at what she was witnessing and a growing understanding that perhaps they were facing something that transcended common logic, a reunion that defied time and death itself. In that room, preserved as a sanctuary of memories, something was being healed, not just Richard's broken heart, but a wound in the very fabric of the intertwined lives of the 3. When they finally left the room hours later, something had definitely changed between them. They were no longer strangers united by mysterious circumstances, but 3 people connected by bonds that seemed to exist even before they met. At night, while Lily slept, Emily found Richard in the library. He was sitting in his usual armchair, but instead of working or drinking alone as he used to do, he was leafing through an album of old photographs. "May I join you?" she asked, hesitant. Richard raised his eyes and smiled, a smile that, just a few days ago, Emily would have considered impossible on that austere face. "Please." She sat in the armchair next to him, and together they observed the photographs that told the story of a family that had known happiness before tragedy. Richard and Rebecca young and in love, Anna growing up amidst smiles and games, moments captured in time that now gained new significance. "I still don't know what to think about all this," confessed Richard, closing the album. "Part of me wants to believe that Lily is somehow Anna returned to us. Another part thinks this is all madness, coincidences exaggerated by pain and hope." "And what does your heart say?" Emily asked softly. Richard looked at her, his eyes reflecting the soft light of the fireplace. "My heart says that, for the first time in years, I feel like I'm waking from a long sleep. That there is purpose again, and that you and Lily are part of that purpose regardless of how you got here." Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest, not just from the kindness of the words, but from the sincerity with which they were spoken. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of what all this means. Afraid to allow myself to believe. Afraid of..." "Of what?" he insisted when she hesitated. "Of allowing myself to feel," Emily completed, lowering her eyes. "I've spent so much time just surviving, protecting." Lily, that I forgot what it's like to let myself feel anything beyond worry and responsibility. Richard extended his hand, lightly touching her fingers on the arm of the chair. Then perhaps we're both learning to live again. Their gazes met, and in that silent moment something blossomed between them, something fragile and new, not yet named, but as real as the heat of the fireplace warming them on that winter night in Pine Ridge. Outside, the fog was once again covering the gardens of the Harrington estate, but inside, for the first time in many years, the darkness was beginning to recede, giving way to a light that no one expected to find again. 2 weeks passed since the opening of Anna's room, and the Harrington estate seemed to breathe a different air. The curtains, previously always closed, now remained open, allowing natural light to invade the rooms. The piano in the music room, covered for years, began to sound occasionally when Richard sat down to play melodies he had composed for Rebecca and Anna. The garden, although still dormant from the mountain winter, showed signs of renewal in the small buds beginning to appear among the vegetation. The most notable transformation, however, was in Richard. The somber and distant man had given way to someone who smiled more frequently, who allowed himself moments of lightness, and who gradually was relearning to live with memories without being paralyzed by pain. Emily observed this change with a mixture of admiration and caution. Admiration for the inner strength he demonstrated, and caution for her own feelings, which grew each day. That Saturday morning, Richard had left early to resolve matters in New York, promising to return in the evening. Lily had taken advantage of the day to explore new corners of the mansion with Martha, who seemed rejuvenated by the new spirit of the house. Emily, in turn, had decided to organize the attic, a task that Richard had mentioned needed to be done, but that he always postponed. The spacious and dusty place still held much of the Harrington family's history: antique furniture, travel trunks, decorative objects from other eras, all carefully covered and preserved. Emily worked methodically, removing the sheets covering the furniture, cleaning the accumulated dust, organizing boxes, and separating what might be useful from what was merely stored memory. In one of the most remote corners, she found an old dresser that seemed to have been placed there to be forgotten. Unlike the other furniture, this one was not covered, as if it had been deliberately left exposed to time. Curious, Emily opened the first drawer. Inside, she found old documents, mainly newspaper clippings. Upon picking them up, she noticed they dated from almost 20 years ago and referred to a scandal involving a construction company. Harrington Construction accused of irregularities in public contracts, said one of the headlines. In another, businessman Richard Harrington claims innocence in case of overpricing. Emily sat on the dusty floor, absorbing that information she had never associated with the Richard she knew. The clippings told the story of an ambitious young businessman whose dealings were investigated on suspicion of corruption. In one of the most recent articles, it read that all charges had been withdrawn for lack of evidence, but the company's reputation had been tarnished. In the second drawer, she found more documents, this time personal ones: birth certificates, old photographs, a carefully traced family tree. Emily studied it with interest, following the branches of the Harrington family until reaching Richard's name, married to Rebecca Alves Harrington. Below them, Anna's name, with the dates of birth and death that confirmed what she already knew. Was then that her gaze caught something that made her freeze. On the family tree next to Rebecca's name, there was a notation that seemed to have been made later, in a different handwriting: Sister Marta Alves Sanders. Sanders? Murmured Emily, feeling a chill run down her spine. Her own surname. With trembling hands, she continued investigating the documents until finding a photograph that left her breathless. It showed two young women, very similar, twins perhaps. One of them was clearly Rebecca, by the resemblance to other photos Emily had already seen. The other, my mother, she whispered, incredulous. The resemblance was undeniable. The woman in the photo was the same one who smiled in a single worn photograph that Emily kept as the only vestige of her parents, who died in an accident when she was only 12, leaving her to be raised by a distant aunt. More agitated now, Emily searched through the rest of the documents, seeking answers to questions she could barely formulate. She found letters exchanged between Rebecca and Marta, her mother, showing a close relationship that had deteriorated after Rebecca's marriage to Richard. The last letter, dated almost 20 years ago, was particularly painful. Dear Sister, perhaps this is the last time I write to you. Richard doesn't know about these letters, and I fear that if he did, he would completely forbid our contact. I don't blame him entirely. The scandal destroyed much more than his company. It destroyed his trust in people. He sees betrayal in every corner, and unfortunately, the fact that you are married to Nathan, who testified against him in the case, makes our reconciliation impossible. I'm pregnant, Marta. I'll have a girl. I wanted so much for our daughters to grow up together, as we did. I wanted my little Anna to know her cousin Emily. Perhaps someday, when the wounds heal, we can reunite our family again. With eternal love, Rebecca. Emily let the letter fall, stunned by the revelation. Rebecca was her aunt. Richard, her uncle by marriage. Anna would have been her cousin. That's why it seemed so familiar when I arrived, she murmured to herself. That's why I felt an immediate connection to this place. She continued exploring the documents, increasingly agitated. In a sealed envelope, she found a birth certificate, her own, along with a handwritten note by Rebecca. Richard must not know. He associates the Sanders family with his ruin, but I cannot ignore that my niece is alive somewhere after the tragedy that took Marta and Nathan. When Anna is older, I will tell her the truth. I hope that by then Richard's heart will have healed enough to accept the past. Emily's head was spinning with the implications of all that. It hadn't been chance that had led her to the Harrington estate on that rainy night. It had been destiny, rebuilding a family connection broken by old grudges and buried secrets. "Mommy!" Lily's voice startled her. The girl was standing at the entrance to the attic, observing her with those eyes that seemed to see beyond the visible. "Lily, what are you doing here? I thought you were with Martha." "She's resting. I came to find you because—" Lily hesitated, a strange gleam in her gaze. "Because she told me it was time." Emily felt a shiver. "She who, Lily?" "Anna," the girl answered simply, approaching. Her eyes fell on the documents scattered around Emily. "You already know, don't you, that they are our family?" Emily nodded slowly, still processing everything. "Yes, I just discovered. Rebecca was my mother's sister. Richard is my uncle." She paused, observing her daughter carefully. "But how did you know, Lily? How could you know something that even I didn't know?" Lily sat beside her, picking up one of the photographs, the one showing Rebecca and Marta together. "I always knew, not with words or clear memories, but like a feeling, since we were little, me and Anna." The choice of words didn't go unnoticed by Emily. "You and Anna?" Lily raised her eyes, and for a moment Emily saw in them an ancient wisdom that didn't belong to a 6-year-old child. "We are and aren't the same person, Mommy. It's hard to explain. Sometimes I feel I'm Lily, your daughter, who was born at the shelter. Other times, I remember things that only Anna could know. This room, the sensation of sinking in the cold water of the lake, Rebecca's face singing me to sleep." Emily held her daughter's hands, trying to anchor herself in reality, while everything around her seemed to dissolve into a nebulous dream. "Lily, are you telling me that—" "Anna promised to return," continued Lily, as if she hadn't been interrupted. "She promised her mother that she would find a way back to this house, to Richard. And she kept her promise through me." An idea formed in Emily's mind as fantastic as it was disturbing. "The bracelet. You had it when you were left at the shelter." Lily nodded. "It was a clue, a sign so that we could find each other again, like breadcrumbs in a dark forest." Emily hugged her daughter, not knowing whether to comfort her or herself. All of it defied her rational understanding of the world, and yet it resonated as truth at some deep level of her being. "Why didn't you tell me before?" she asked softly. "Because you weren't ready to hear, and because I didn't fully understand myself." Lily moved away a little, looking into her mother's eyes. "You're not afraid, are you?" Emily smiled, despite the tears that were beginning to form. "A little. It's a lot to process, but I also feel a relief, as if I finally understood why I always felt so lost, why I always sought a place to belong. "And now we've found it," said Lily with simplicity. "We're home." The sound of a car approaching broke the moment. Richard had returned earlier than expected. Emily quickly began to gather the scattered documents, her heart racing at the prospect of confronting him with what she had discovered. "Leave them," said Lily, holding her hand. "It's time to end the secrets. All of them." Emily hesitated, but something in Lily's conviction made her yield. Together they descended the attic stairs, carrying the letters and photographs that rewrote the story of their lives. They found Richard in the main hall, removing his coat while talking to Martha about preparations for dinner. Seeing them descend the stairs, his face lit up with a smile that quickly faded upon noticing Emily's serious expression and the documents in her hands. "Did something happen?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Emily approached, feeling strangely calm now that the moment had arrived. "We need to talk, Richard, about the past, about who we really are." Martha, perceiving the gravity of the situation, discreetly withdrew to the kitchen, leaving them alone. Richard looked at the papers in Emily's hands, his countenance becoming serious. "In my office," he said simply, guiding them down the corridor. Once inside, with the door closed, Emily spread the documents on the desk. Richard examined them, in silence, his face an impenetrable mask as he absorbed the meaning of what he saw. "Where did you find this?" he finally asked, his voice controlled. "In the attic, in a dresser that seemed to have been deliberately forgotten." Richard picked up the photograph of Rebecca and Marta, his fingers tracing the contours of the smiling faces. "You look like her," he said softly. "Like Marta. I noticed it from the first moment, but couldn't identify why. It had been so long, and I had tried so hard to forget." "So you knew?" asked Emily, unable to hide the accusation in her voice. "You knew who I was when you took us in that night?" Richard shook his head. "No, I didn't know. I just felt something familiar about you, something I couldn't name. That's why I allowed you to stay, even against my better judgment." "Why the hatred against my family?" insisted Emily. "The letters speak of a scandal, of a testimony against you." Richard sighed deeply, running his hand through his graying hair. He suddenly seemed older, the weight of the past bending his shoulders. "It was a long time ago," he began, his voice distant as if revisiting painful memories. "I was young, ambitious, building my empire from scratch. Rebecca and Marta were inseparable, even after each followed her own path. Your father, Nathan, worked with me. He was my partner, my closest friend." He paused, his eyes fixed on the flames of the lit fireplace. "When the accusations of irregularities arose, I was innocent. Someone was embezzling money, yes, but it wasn't me. All the evidence pointed to Nathan. I confronted him and he denied everything, turning the accusations back on me." "My father wouldn't do that," protested Emily, family loyalty overriding reason. "I agree," said Richard, surprising her. "I discovered years later, when it was too late, that we had been manipulated. A third partner, who remained in the shadows, had orchestrated everything, to divide us and take control. When I finally put all the pieces together, Nathan and Marta had already—" He stopped, unable to complete the sentence. "Departed," Lily completed softly, seated in a nearby armchair, observing the adults with attentive eyes. Richard nodded, grateful for the intervention. "Yes, and I had lost everything, my original company, my friends, the trust of the only family Rebecca had. I rebuilt my life from scratch, determined never to trust anyone again, never to let the past catch up with me." "That's why you hid all these documents," concluded Emily. "That's why you never told the truth even after you discovered my father's innocence." "Pride is a terrible counselor," admitted Richard, his voice choked. "And shame, even worse. When I finally knew the truth, I had already spent years cultivating resentment. How could I simply admit I was wrong, that I had destroyed relationships through a mistake?" Emily approached, gently placing her hand on his arm. "What happened after my parents departed? Did Rebecca know I had survived?" Richard nodded slowly. "She discovered through a former maid from your parents' house who told her, that their daughter had been rescued and taken to a shelter. Rebecca wanted to find her immediately, bring her to live with us. I opposed it. The shame was evident on his face. I said it was better to leave the past behind, that reopening that wound would only bring more pain. She accepted that? Asked Emily, incredulous. Not completely. She continued discreetly seeking information, keeping the documents you found. She planned to tell Anna everything when she was older, so that together they could find you. But then came the accident. And after. Rebecca's illness, completed Emily, the pieces fitting together. Richard turned to Lily, who had remained strangely calm throughout the revelation. And now you are here. Both of you are. Against all odds, destiny brought you to my door. It wasn't destiny, said Lily, rising from the armchair. It was a promise. Anna promised to reunite the family again, and I came to fulfill that promise. A deep silence fell over the room as the three absorbed the weight of those words and the revealed truths. Outside the window, the sun was beginning to set, tinting the Pine Ridge sky with shades of orange and red that reflected on the clouds, like a silent fire. What do we do now? Emily finally asked, her voice breaking the silence. Richard looked at her and then at Lily, a new determination in his gaze. Now, we honor the promise. We finish what Rebecca and Anna started. We rebuild our family. He extended his hands, one to Emily, the other to Lily. They took them without hesitation, forming a circle that symbolized a union that transcended time, pain, and even death. No more secrets, said Richard, his voice firm despite the emotion. No more resentments, just the truth and a new beginning. In that moment, as the last ray of sun penetrated through the office window, illuminating the three like a natural spotlight, Emily felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood, the feeling of belonging, of finally being home. Lily smiled, her eyes reflecting a wisdom that transcended her age. She's happy now, she said simply. Both of them are. And as if to confirm her words, a gentle breeze entered through the window, bringing with it the unmistakable scent of lavender and the distant, almost imperceptible sound of a childish laugh that seemed to dance among them before dissipating into the night air that was arriving. The family that destiny had separated was finally reunited, not in the way any of them could have imagined, but in a manner that healed old wounds and paved the way for a future that, for the first time in many years, seemed to shine with the light of hope. Spring arrived in Pine Ridge, bringing with it colors and scents that transformed the landscape around the Harrington estate. The trees, previously stripped bare by winter, now displayed lush foliage, and the garden, carefully cultivated, exploded with flowers of all shades. The house itself seemed different, the windows permanently open, new light curtains dancing in the breeze, the sound of music and conversations filling spaces previously dominated by silence. 3 months had passed since the revelations in Richard's office, 3 months of adjustments, sincere conversations and rebuilding ties that time and circumstances had broken. Emily and Lily were no longer temporary guests, but permanent members of that family that was recomposing itself in unexpected ways. That Sunday morning the sun shone with special intensity, as if blessing the small celebration being prepared. Martha and Helen moved about the kitchen with animation, preparing treats for the special lunch that would officially mark the new phase of the Harrington family. Emily adjusted the final details of the table set in the garden, under the shade of a large centennial tree. There were fresh flowers in crystal vases, fine china that hadn't been used in years, and glasses that gleamed under the light filtered through the leaves. She wore a simple but elegant dress, a gift from Richard that enhanced her natural beauty and the subtle transformation the last months had wrought in her, not just on the exterior, but mainly in her interior, where the constant sensation of displacement had given way to a profound feeling of belonging. "It's perfect," said Richard, approaching from behind her and encircling her waist in a gesture that was now familiar and welcome to her. Emily turned to face him, still marveling at the transformation of the somber and bitter man she had met that winter. Richard smiled more, laughed openly, and his eyes had lost that veil of constant sadness. Some expression lines were beginning to form the corners of his eyes marks of smiles no longer of pain. "Do you think they'll like it?" she asked, the anxiety evident in her voice. "They'll love it," Richard assured her, placing a soft kiss on her forehead. How could they not? The they she referred to were the guests expected for that lunch, the first the mansion had received in more than 7 years. Old friends of Richard and Rebecca, curious neighbors about the transformation of the previously isolated house, and especially Margaret, the aunt who had raised Emily after her parents' death, and who, until a few weeks ago, believed that her niece and Lily were traveling through the countryside in search of work. "I still can't believe Aunt Margaret agreed to come," confessed Emily, nervously adjusting an already perfectly folded napkin. "She's always been so reserved, so distrustful." "She's family," Richard replied simply. "And family is what we're rebuilding here." The sound of children's laughter attracted the attention of both. Lily was running through the garden, pursued by Jacob, the 8-year-old son of the new gardener Richard had hired. In recent weeks, the friendship between the children had blossomed, bringing even more life to the property. Lily continued to have her moments of disconcerting wisdom, but also allowed herself increasingly to simply be a child, playing, laughing, occasionally making mischief, typical of her age. "She seems so normal," commented Emily, observing her daughter. "Sometimes I wonder if all that really happened, or if we invented fantastic explanations for coincidences." Richard followed her gaze, contemplative. "I think we'll never know for certain. Maybe it's not necessary to know. The important thing is that we're here together, building something new on the foundations of the past." "Do you still see Anna in her?" asked Emily, the question that had hovered between them for weeks, but which they had never explicitly formulated. Richard reflected for a moment before answering. "I see traces sometimes, a gesture, an expression, the way she tilts her head, when she's concentrating. But I see mainly Lily, your daughter, our Lily." Emily rested her head on his shoulder, feeling at peace with that answer. In recent months they had decided not to seek scientific or rational explanations for the events that had united them. Whether it was reincarnation, cosmic coincidence, or some divine plan beyond human comprehension, the result was what mattered: the rebirth of a family and the healing of old wounds. The sound of an approaching car interrupted the moment. Martha appeared at the kitchen door, announcing, "The first guests have arrived, Mr. Richard." Richard and Emily exchanged a quick glance before heading to the main entrance. For Emily, it was as if she were reliving her own arrival at the mansion, but now from a completely different perspective, no longer as a desperate stranger seeking shelter, but as an integral part of that home. A modest car parked in front of the house, and from it descended a grey-haired lady with erect posture and a cautious expression. Aunt Margaret, so familiar and at the same time so different from what Emily remembered, perhaps because she now saw her with new eyes, better understanding the circumstances that had united them. "Emily!" called the lady, her voice betraying emotion despite her controlled posture. "You look different." Emily stepped forward, embracing her aunt with genuine affection. "I'm happy, Aunt, truly happy." Margaret returned the embrace with initial hesitation that soon yielded to a deeper emotion. When they separated, her eyes were moist. "And this must be Lily," she said, looking at the girl who was approaching at a run, her cheeks flushed from play. "My God, how she's grown since the last time I saw her." Lily smiled, that luminous smile that captivated everyone. "Hello, great-aunt. Welcome to our home." The naturalness with which Lily used the term "our home" didn't go unnoticed by any of the adults. Richard stepped forward, extending his hand to Margaret. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, ma'am. Emily has told me a lot about how important you were in her life." Margaret studied him with perceptive eyes before accepting the greeting. "So you're Richard Harrington, Rebecca's brother." "Brother-in-law, actually," Richard corrected gently. "Rebecca was Marta's sister, Emily's mother." Margaret nodded, a shadow of sadness passing over her face. "Yes, of course, Marta, my niece. So similar to you, Emily. She would have been proud of the woman you've become." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of more cars. Soon, the previously silent garden was full of voices and laughter. Old friends greeted Richard with astonishment and joy, commenting on the transformation they saw in him. Curious neighbors admired the changes in the property. Lily and Jacob ran among the guests, occasionally stopping to chat with some adult who offered them sweets or compliments. The lunch proceeded in an atmosphere of contained but genuine celebration. Richard, in a moment that surprised even Emily, stood up to make a brief speech. "I thank all of you for your presence today. I know that for many it's a surprise to see me like this, with open doors, receiving friends I neglected for so long." He paused, his gaze meeting Emily's before continuing. "Life has its own paths, sometimes tortuous, sometimes painful, but that eventually lead us exactly where we need to be. Emily and Lily arrived at my door on a stormy night, and with them came the light this house had lost long ago." He raised his glass in a toast. "To family, that given to us by blood, that which we build by choice, and that which destiny places in our path when we least expect it." The toast was accompanied by everyone, and Emily felt tears of emotion forming in her eyes. Aunt Margaret, seated beside her, squeezed her hand in a silent gesture of understanding and approval. The afternoon progressed with conversations, music on the piano played by Richard, and even some improvised dances in the garden. Lily and Jacob organized a small theatrical piece that they presented to the adults, drawing applause and laughter. The mansion, which for so long had been a monument to mourning, now pulsed with renewed life. When the sun began to set, tinting the sky with shades of pink and gold, the guests began to say goodbye. Aunt Margaret was the last, insisting on helping organize the kitchen before departing, to the despair of Helen, who saw her domain invaded. "You seem well here," commented the lady, as she and Emily put away the last dishes. "You've finally found your place." Emily smiled, feeling the truth of those words. "Yes, I have, in a way I never imagined possible." "And Richard?" asked Margaret, the concern evident in her voice. "Is he good to you and Lily?" "The best," Emily replied without hesitation. "He loves us, and we love him." Margaret nodded, satisfied. "That's what your mother always wished for you, you know. Not necessarily wealth or position, but love, security, belonging." Before leaving, the aunt hugged Emily for a long time, whispering in her ear, "Marta would be so proud, and Rebecca too." Those words stayed with Emily as she watched Aunt Margaret's car move away down the driveway. Richard approached, placing an arm around her shoulders. "Tired?" he asked, noticing her contemplative expression, a little but happy. Lily joined them, her hair slightly disheveled after a day of play, a satisfied smile on her childish face. "It was the best day of all," she declared with conviction. Richard picked her up with naturalness, a gesture that had become common between them. "Better than the picnic day at the lake, or the day we went to the astronomical observatory?" Lily pretended to consider seriously before answering. "Better, because today the whole family was together. The one we can see and the one we can't." Richard and Emily exchanged an understanding look. Those moments of disconcerting wisdom still happened occasionally, reminding them of the extraordinary journey that had united them. "Let's go inside," suggested Richard. "The night is getting cool." As they walked back to the mansion, Emily observed the welcoming lights that shone in the windows, the garden that now flourished under attentive care, the stone path where so many stories had translated over the years. Everything seemed at once familiar and completely new, as if the past and present had finally found a way to coexist in harmony. That night, after putting Lily to bed, Emily found Richard on the veranda, contemplating the starry sky with a serene expression. She approached silently, sitting beside him in the rocking chair wide enough to accommodate them both. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, resting her head on his shoulder. "About circles," he replied, encircling her with his arm. "About how life seems to take us in circles, bringing us back to places we thought we had left behind, but in completely new ways." Emily reflected on those words, thinking about her own journey. The orphaned girl who had grown up without knowing her true story, the young woman who had found Lily, and with her formed her first family, and now the woman who was rediscovering, roots she had never known she possessed. "Do you think it was all planned?" she asked. "All this, the three of us, this house, the revelations?" Richard remained silent for a few moments before answering. "I don't know if planned is the right word. Perhaps destined. As if, despite all the detours and obstacles, some paths simply needed to be traveled, some connections needed to be remade." "By Anna," ventured Emily, giving voice to the thought that occasionally still arose between them. "By all of us," replied Richard. "By Anna, by Rebecca, by your parents, by you, by me, by Lily, by all whom we loved and lost and whom somehow we found again." They remained in silence for some time, rocked by the gentle movement of the chair and by the night sounds of the garden, the singing of crickets, the rustling of leaves, the distant murmur of the small fountain that Richard had recently reactivated. "I have something for you," he finally said, removing a small velvet box from his pocket. "I was going to wait for the perfect moment, but I realized that the perfect moment is simply being together, here and now." Emily opened the box with slightly trembling hands. Inside rested a delicate ring with a single stone that captured and reflected the starlight. "Is this a proposal?" she asked, her voice choked with emotion. Richard smiled, that smile that had become increasingly frequent in recent months, completely transforming his formerly austere face. "It's a promise," he replied, "of family, of future, of love. If you want it." Emily extended her left hand, allowing him to slide the ring onto her finger. "I want it," she said simply, "more than anything." The kiss that sealed that promise was soft and deep, carrying with it the weight of all the stories that had led them there. The joys and sorrows, the losses and discoveries, the endings and beginnings. When they separated, Richard kept his face close to hers, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "Do you believe people can have more than one chance in life? More than one chance to love, to build, to belong?" "I believe," Emily replied without hesitation, "we're living that second chance now." The next morning, Lily was the first to notice the ring on Emily's finger. Her eyes shone with a joy that seemed to illuminate her entire face. "Now it's official," she declared with satisfaction, as if confirming something she had known for a long time. "We're really a family." Richard, who was entering the kitchen at that moment, picked the girl up, spinning her in the air before hugging her. "We always were," he said, extending his arm to include Emily in the embrace. "We just took a while to discover it." Emily closed her eyes, allowing herself to fully feel that moment. The warmth of the arms that embraced her, the soft scent of lavender that still occasionally lingered in the air of the mansion, the deep certainty that, after so many years of searching, she had finally found her place in the world. Outside, the garden of the Harrington estate bloomed under the spring sun, the hydrangeas displaying their most intense blue in the early morning hours, exactly as Anna used to say. Life, in all its mysteries and possibilities, continued its eternal cycle of renewal and hope. And if occasionally someone passing by the property swore they had seen a girl in a blue dress playing among the flowers when supposedly there was no child nearby, or if, on the quietest nights, the residents of the mansion heard the distant sound of childish laughter echoing through the corridors, well, some things simply transcended rational explanations. As Emily had once said, there are more things in heaven and earth than our vain philosophy can explain. And in that reborn house where past and present danced in harmony, this truth was accepted not with fear or resistance, but with gratitude and love. "I promise we'll be happy here," whispered Richard in Emily's ear as they watched Lily run through the garden, chasing a blue butterfly that had momentarily landed on her bracelet of colorful beads. "We already are," she replied, intertwining her fingers with his. "We already are." And so, under the blue sky of Pine Ridge, the Harrington estate left behind its reputation as a somber and isolated place, transforming again into what it